phase 2, then phase 3, and ultimately towards a two-state solution. Thank you.
Jeb Dougal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No amount of rowing back by the US State Department can change that what the United States President intimated earlier on this week amounts to ethnic cleansing. Is the UK government of the same view that what his plan would amount to, if prosecuted, would be ethnic cleansing? And if not, what does the UK government understand ethnic cleansing to be? And I've heard an awful lot of warm words from the government and ambition about what we believe in, what we stand for, what we've delivered around the immediate humanitarian crisis. But don't let's forget that the horrors that have happened over the last 18 months are because of the vacuum that has been created by international inaction over the plight of the Palestinians for the last 50 years. What will this government do to change that drastic situation?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did list the decisions that the UK government took, which were different from those of the previous government a few moments ago. We have been determined to ensure that when it comes to the ICC and the ICJ, for example, that we're very clear about their jurisdiction, that also we remove that ban on UNRWA funding. As well, and that we've supported, for example, moves at the UN through the Security Council that have been specifically focused on trying to push forward the two-state solution that is so important. And Mr. Speaker, I'd refer to my previous remarks about the Prime Minister himself underlining the importance of that right to return. Thank you.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, we welcomed the Prime Minister's comments saying that Palestinians must be allowed home, they must be allowed to rebuild, and we should be with them in that rebuild on the way to a two-state solution. Yet settler violence continues to increase against Palestinians. So would the Minister confirm that this government has no intention of lifting the sanctions the UK has imposed on Israeli settlers and settler groups? And in fact, would it consider expanding those sanctions?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend, I'm sure, will be aware that the UK has imposed, I believe it's in autumn, sanctions against those who had engaged in and promoted violence as settlers. We condemn that activity. We believe that it reduces the prospect for a two-state solution. Of course, when it comes to future sanctions designations, for me to talk about them from the dispatch box, Mr. Speaker, would reduce their efficacy, and therefore I will not do that here. Thank you.
Sir Alex Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I start by thanking the Minister for the clarity of her answers today. Mr. Speaker, we're all aware that Iran played it's taking, how it is involved in making sure that Iran is not able to re-establish itself to fund and arm the groups that specifically want to destroy the state of Israel.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable member for his comments, and the UK government is clear that Iran has long destabilised the Middle East. That's obviously been through military means, but also financial and political support as well to its proxies and partners, including Iranian-aligned militia groups in Iraq and Syria, Hezbollah, as I mentioned, in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen as well. We will continue, Mr. Speaker, to work with international partners to encourage de-escalation. Long-term peace and security in the Middle East can't be achieved without addressing Iran's destabilising activity. The UK government is very clear on that. Thank you.
Richard Bagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Trump has lifted the lid on Israel's real plan, the ethnic cleansing, the forced displacement of Palestinians. Nobody can any longer claim that they didn't know and don't know what's going on, a genocide. And all the warm words in the world about a two-state solution won't stop this. Only sanctions will, as the world's top court demands. And that means bans on Israeli settlement goods entering this country. It means sanctions on trade. It means an arms embargo. Without doing that, people and this House will never be able to say that we did everything that we could to stop these crimes that will echo down the generations. So will the Minister finally agree to confirming that the government will finally treat Israel as it's rightly treated Russia and impose widespread sanctions?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on my honourable friend's question in relation to forced displacement, I was very clear earlier, Mr. Speaker, about the fact that the UK government is absolutely determined to ensure that there is not forced displacement. That would be contrary to international law. Gazans must be allowed home, and in the words of the Prime Minister himself, they must be allowed to rebuild, Mr. Speaker. He asked about the situation in relation to arms exports. I know that my honourable friend will be aware that on the 2nd
the Minister, does she recognise that forcible displacement of a population under occupation constitutes ethnic cleansing and is a war crime? Will she clearly and unequivocally condemn the remarks of President Trump? And will she recognise the state of Palestine as an essential step to the long-term sustainable peace she has articulated support for? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable lady for her question. We have been very clear, as I mentioned just a few seconds ago, about the fact that any attempt to prevent Gazans from returning home, to prevent them from returning to their communities, to suggest that, for example, they must be housed and remained in other Arab states, any attempt to do that would be contrary to international law. And she, I'm sure, understands that. She's not just heard me say it, she will have heard the Prime Minister say it, of course, yesterday, and the Foreign Secretary has said it many times. She asked about our approach in relation to recognition. Mr. Speaker, I agree with her that lever of recognition is an important one, that it will be crucial for ensuring the two-state solution that is going to be so important for peace in the region, Mr. Speaker. That is why the UK is considering so carefully how we go about this, because we know that ultimately both Israelis and Palestinians have that right to be able to live in sovereign states in security, and we're going to make sure that our actions are as strong as possible to getting us to that outcome. Thank you.
John Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the Minister's unequivocal commitment to a two-state solution, and the government is right to reject anything that risks undermining the ceasefire and the release of the remaining hostages. But no top-down political solution is going to be sustainable unless we build trust between Israelis and Palestinian communities and support the peace builders of the future. The Prime Minister has committed the UK to taking a lead on an international fund for peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Can the Minister please provide an update on what progress is being made on that fund?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for what he stated about the clarity of the UK's position when it comes to peace building. I know this is an issue that he is passionate about, as well as many others within this chamber. It's also an area, of course, Mr. Speaker, where the UK does have a certain amount of expertise derived, for example, from those who've been peace building within Northern Ireland, but in other contexts as well. It really is important that we seek to contribute towards this, Mr. Speaker. Of course, the most urgent thing, Mr. Speaker, is to ensure that the ceasefire is held to, that we move from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3. But of course, in the future, it will be important to do what we can to contribute to peace building. He's right about the Prime Minister's announcement, and we are right now considering how we can ensure that that's delivered. Thank you.
Robin Wall.
Mr. Speaker, I've been kindly contacted by many constituents, including Maggie Gardner, who have all contacted me deeply concerned about the well-being of Dr. Hussam Abu Shafia, who has been detained by the IDF. I've written to the Foreign Secretary on this, and I know that the government has raised this issue with the Israeli authorities. So can I ask the Minister, what explanation has been received in those meetings, and what further work is the Home Secretary undertaking to obtain more detail about this very important case?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to his constituent for raising this important issue. As he says, it's one that many members are concerned about and the general public are concerned about. As he rightly states, this is an issue that the UK government has raised with Israeli counterparts. We are concerned about this situation. We believe that there needs to be clarity about why any individuals are being held. That includes medical staff. And it is also absolutely crucial that, of course, the Red Cross are able to visit those who have been detained. So we've made that point very forcefully. Thank you.
Andy Slot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Since the ceasefire in Gaza, there's been open warfare against civilians in the West Bank, dehumanising of the whole Palestinian population, and the threat of ethnic cleansing of a second Nakba. Surely we can expect a proportionate response from the UK government. Starting with the advisory opinion, with recognition, and with the banning of trade on settlements.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising the situation in the West Bank. We are deeply concerned by the intensity of IDF military operations in the West Bank and attacks from Palestinian militants as well. We do recognise Israel's need to defend itself against security threats, but we are deeply worried by the methods Israel's employed and by reports of civilian casualties, Mr. Speaker, and the destruction of civilian infrastructure. We're very clear. It's in no one's interest to see further conflict and instability. Thank you.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the commitment and the given to the House today by the Minister. And the determination over showing our opposition to this disgraceful approach by Trump. But I'm disappointed that she does not see this as the ideal moment in which to commit to recognising the state of Palestine. But also, can she tell us what is being done across government to reassure the communities in this country who've suffered outrageous abuse since October the 7th in 2023?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do want to underline to the honourable lady that we've been very clear. Palestinian statehood is the right of the Palestinian people. It's not in the gift of any neighbour. We're clear that it's essential to the long-term security of Israel as well. And the UK is working with partners to support a path to long-term peace and stability with a two-state solution. On the issue of abuse, Mr. Speaker, and it was quite right that she raised this, of course, the UK condemned, the UK government condemns any form of abuse. We've seen a disturbing rise, Mr. Speaker, in anti-Semitism, also in Islamophobia. All forms of hatred must be condemned and acted against, and of course we're working hard against that, and particularly from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Ryan Lisham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. How does the government address Amnesty International's concerns that economic activities with illegal Israeli settlements contribute to both their sustainability and growth, thus undermining Palestinians' rights, and that business enterprises involved with Israel's illegal settlements may be involved and complicit in international crimes?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're very clear. Israeli efforts to undermine a two-state solution through settlement building, settlement violence and punitive economic measures are unacceptable. We're aware that settlement expansion reached record levels in the past year. That was very disturbing, and that has been accompanied, of course, by an increase in settler violence. And our position on this has been clear. I will reiterate briefly, Mr. Speaker. We know that settlements are illegal under international law. They present an obstacle to peace, and they threaten the physical viability of a two-state solution.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The current ceasefire is clearly welcome, but fragile, given Israel seems determined to pursue a policy of expansionism. We see the bombings in Jenin, we've seen the expansion to southern Lebanon and also into the buffer zone of the Golan Heights. And they will only be emboldened by the irresponsible ramblings of the new US president. So does she agree with me that we are actually witnessing ethnic cleansing? And can I urge the UK government to lead at the United Nations with a new resolution for a Marshall Plan to ensure the rebuilding of Gaza on the terms of the Palestinian people?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to him for raising the issue of the role that the UK can play when it comes to the recovery and rebuilding of Gaza. We have been working with a range of partners around this. As I mentioned before, Mr. Speaker, we've been seeking to support the Palestinian Authority on this, contributing experts towards their endeavours in relation to that. And the World Bank has conducted another damage assessment, an updated damage assessment. We're looking very closely at that and seeking to work with them and other partners on this, Mr. Speaker.
Any proposal that would oversee the forcible transfer of the entire population of Gaza would clearly constitute an egregious breach of international humanitarian law, but also amount to ethnic cleansing. Now, the government has previously emphasised the importance of a rules-based international order underpinned by adherence to international humanitarian law. But how does the government hope to defend and strengthen that order when it appears that yet another permanent member of the United Nations Security Council seems intent on dismantling it?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for his words, making clear that the UK government does indeed support a rules-based international order. That's critically important when it comes to, of course, international law, international humanitarian law, as well as we have been discussing, Mr. Speaker. We have made that position clear repeatedly. We will continue to hold to it, including within the UN and with all of our partners. Thank you.
Rachel Muscle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that the ceasefire is incredibly fragile and that there have been breaches with impunity, particularly we think about the people of Jenin at this time. However, does the Minister recognise that the lack of recognition of Palestine now is denying the protection that people across Palestine need?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That protection is critically important at every stage, Mr. Speaker. The UK government has been absolutely clear that we have seen too much, far too much death and destruction in Gaza, Mr. Speaker, that we are seeing now truly heartrending scenes of people trying to return to communities that have been destroyed. We have seen over 46,000 people being killed, Mr. Speaker. That population requires our support, and I do not believe that is contingent on political circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Minister for her update yesterday. It's greatly appreciated. But would the Minister agree with me that we are standing on the precipice of a new dangerous world order, leaving one behind that bases global peace on global justices that we have recognized? Because we have close to 48,000 Palestinian men, women, and children being killed. Hundreds of thousands returning to once what was their homes to rubble. And as we speak, Minister, mothers are looking for their children in the rubble. Whilst at the same time, we have the most powerful man of the most powerful country in the world behaving like a gangster, talking about replacing these people from their land, replacing their homes with beachfront properties, creating casinos and a Riviera. Is this the time, Minister, where we categorically utilize the same words as we do for other conflicts and call this out for what it is, and that is the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people? And we must immediately put into place the recognition of a Palestinian state. Can we stand up to President Trump and tell him Gaza is not for sale?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I stated in response to the previous question, the UK has been and will continue to be an advocate for the international rules-based order. That's incredibly important. We need to see those rules being upheld by all, and of course we will continue to advocate for that at the UN and in relation to all countries, Mr. Speaker. We've been very clear about our position. It must be possible for people to return. I agree with him about the horrendous situation so many Gazans are facing. We've already talked about this in this urgent question, Mr. Speaker. And I would just underline again what the Prime Minister said yesterday very clearly. When it comes to Gazans returning to their homes and communities, they must be allowed home. Thank you.
Jacob Collier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The comments made by the President of the United States about a Riviera of the Middle East undermine the hard work towards a two-state solution, which, as the Minister has said, is the only way for a lasting peace in the region. Can the Minister confirm that it will be for the Palestinian people to determine the destiny of their country?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for asking me to confirm that it will be for the Palestinian people to determine their future of Gaza. Absolutely, we've been crystal clear on that. And indeed, as I stated previously, we've been working with the Palestinian Authority in relation to this. Thank you.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for her answers to the UQ? Let me be clear in the first instance that, not having seen the full detail of Trump's plans for Gaza, I believe that I need to see more detail, and I think we should all look at that more astutely. But what I very much want, Mr. Speaker, is a future for Gaza that can see a barren wasteland of death and destruction to become something of value, with jobs, economy, and safety. Israel needs a secure border that safeguards Israeli citizens so that Hamas terrorists, murderers, rapists, and child killers can't murder Israeli people. And remember that China and Iran has stood alongside Hamas. Will the Minister consent to keeping an open mind and dialogue to a fresh approach to help those in Israel and in the Gaza Strip? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure that members right across the House want to ensure that there is in the future within Gaza a situation that is economically viable. That's one of many reasons why commercial operations have to be allowed to resume. It's really important the government of Israel enables that. But we also, of course, need to see a situation for Gazans and for all Palestinians of security and of sovereignty, as I talked about before, as well as, of course, for Israelis. When he talks about economic empowerment, this is an issue that's been crucial for the UK government. I saw that for myself with Palestinians when I visited the West Bank, some of the support the UK has been engaged in there, and we will continue that work. Thank you.
Ferguson.
I thank my honourable friend for securing this important question today. Over the last 16 or so months, we have seen Palestinian people being displaced from their homes and communities, on many occasions, on not just once, but perhaps twice or three times. So for the President of the United States to suggest a further forced displacement seems to me to be not just illegal, but also incredibly cruel. In diplomacy, we believe that timing is everything. So in order to give the Palestinian people some protection from outside actors who seem to wish to dictate what should happen to them, is it not now the time that the international community and our government should recognise Palestine as a state and give it all the international supports and strengths that that gives it?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my honourable friend was right to refer to the levels of displacement. As I said previously, Mr. Speaker, 90% of the population of Gaza have been displaced. As she says, some twice or three times, some up to 9 times having been displaced. And when we consider the impact on whole families having to move so many times, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that we're all disturbed by that. She is right that timing is important. Of course it is. That is why the UK government is considering this so carefully. We must use the mechanisms we have available to us, Mr. Speaker, to ensure, above all, that we get to a two-state solution and the peace that is the right of Palestinians and Israelis. Thank you.
Joe Powell.
Mr. Speaker, the devastation in Gaza needs a strong international coalition focused on reconstruction, humanitarian aid, and a pathway to a negotiated two-state solution with a viable Palestinian state, not speculation about handing over territory and forced displacement. And on humanitarian aid, there are now 2 pieces of legislation that have come into effect that will ban UNRWA operations in areas under Israeli occupation. So can the Minister outline what actions this government is taking to prevent the largest humanitarian aid operation in Gaza collapsing and the devastating consequences that will have on Palestinians?
Minister.
My honourable friend is right, Mr. Speaker. Gaza's recovery needs are going to be vast. They're extremely serious. The UK is engaged with partners on assessing these and working together so that we can ensure that the unprecedented scale of destruction in Gaza is remediated. And that is going to require, for example, innovative financing mechanisms. And above all, it must be a process that, as I mentioned before, Mr. Speaker, is driven by Palestinians. He talked about UNRWA, Mr. Speaker. I discussed that situation with the Emergency Relief Coordinator a few days ago. We continue to work with partners around this. The UK government's position on UNRWA has been articulated a number of times from this dispatch box. We believe they must be able to continue to operate. Thank you.
Final question, Chris Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let us be clear. Palestinian land belongs to the Palestinians, and any implication that they should be forced from it should be unequivocally condemned. But individual Palestinians are routinely forced from their land by illegal settlement building in the West Bank. Will the Minister join me in unequivocally condemning illegal settlement building in the West Bank?
Minister.
Yes, and having seen that activity from myself, Mr. Speaker, and the impact that it has had on Palestinians and their families, the violence that is often accompanied it, and the economic damage that it has done, I'm very well convinced of that. And indeed, the UK government has been and has stated that many times. Thank you.
Thank you. Let the front benches change over. Right, we now come to business questions. Shadow Leader of the House, Jesse Norman.
Will the Leader of the House
you.